Yayoi Kusama by Annette Odell. She was born in Japan in 1929, and her family had a big impact on what she would later create in her art. Her mother was very abusive to her, and her father had many affairs. And at a young age, she started having vivid hallucinations, which shaped her artistic style of polka dots. She saw a stream and saw rocks in the stream, and like all the rocks were moving, and it looked like polka dots to her. And then fabrics started speaking to her as well. She sewed for the Japanese army in World War II, and that got her interest in sewing at a young age. In Japan, she studied Japanese art, but she was more interested in American and European avant-garde work at that time. A lot more stuff was happening there, while in Japan they were focusing on the classical Japanese art. And so at age 27, she left to New York City. So she went to New York, and then she went to Seattle, and then Georgia O'Keeffe was like, come on back to New York. So she did, and she was close with a lot of other famous artists too, like Klaus Oldenburg and Georgia O'Keeffe. And her first art phase, she was just covering everyday objects with phallic imagery. And then next, she began experimenting with mirrors, and then began organizing happenings. And so that's where we get the Narcissus Garden, the piece that's in R250. But yeah, the happenings often feature nude bodies painted in polka dots, designed to protest the Vietnam War. So this was in the 60s in New York, where a lot of people were protesting the Vietnam War, like Klaus Oldenburg. And she also dabbled in avant-garde fashion. She had a line with Bloomingdale's, and then later, in the more like the last 10 years, she's had a couple more lines. And then at an old age, she returned to Japan for a long time. Like no one had heard from her. She was off the grid. But then she had her mirrored pumpkins with polka dots, and she thought those were a representation of herself, and those were really successful. So they went to one museum at first, and then now they tour all over the world. And there are many museums, like most popular exhibit that's come to them. So the artist's style, she was deeply influenced by the hallucinations she had as a kid. So the polka dots that she saw, like in everything, and her hallucinations were like infinite in her mind. And so like that's where we get the ideas of, this will be on the next slide, with polka dots and a theme of infinity is on this slide. And she saw art as a way to cope with her mental illness. She once said that she would be dead if she didn't have art, because she was pretty crazy. So the tiny polka dots and the tiny beings of light were part of infinity, because they just go on forever. Like the piece at the DMA that used to be there, it was just like, looks like infinite polka dots, because that's what she saw in her life. And also another theme in her art, she confronted personal phobias. So because of her unloyal father, she had a fear of sex, and so that's why there's a lot of like sexual things in her art. And she's similar to the pop art and the minimalism movements. She was exhibited next to Andy Warhol, Klaus Oldenburg. So all of those things that were happening, she was a part of. So the context of the artist's work. So it started as protests against the Vietnam War. She even wrote a letter to Nixon saying she would have sex with him if he ended the war. And so all of her happenings were protests to that. And it's just a part of the counterculture of the 1670s, like Narcissus Garden, protesting consumerism, so it was anti-consumerist. And the context was, like sexual awakening, and she was confronting her own personal phobia of that. And so it fits in with that. And then she's used the tactics of being very anti-consumer and sex and to protest the war. So that's how they go together. And my work is similar to hers in form because she had many fashion lines, and the artistic style of polka dots, which is the infinity in her hallucinations, is in all of her clothes, and often her clothes have like multiple polka dot patterns kind of almost clashing with each other but working together, like so that's why I have two polka dot patterns in my dress. And this is some of her other artwork. You can see on the right, like she's got the different polka dot colors, and it's all polka dots. And